Annie and I are co-facilitating a peer supervision group called Contemplating Sex and Psychedelics. And we're excited about it, and we wanted to talk a bit about what it is, why it's being birthed into this world, and also answer a key question that keeps on coming up, which is like, is this program, is this offering appropriate for me? That would be you, dear listener. If you're asking that question, this would be a place to get that answered. Yeah. So what do we want to say about contemplating sex and psychedelics? I first met Annie like in this most recent iteration when she offered a lecture about the intersection of sex and psychedelics. And so from there, we birthed this inspiration came through to create a peer supervision group to address some of the challenges that come up in this space. And you've so beautifully articulated some of those challenges. Do you want to name some of them now, Annie?
Sure. And I feel like it might be connected to how we met originally, which is in the Somatica training. Just the fact that explicit sexual positivity is something that's often left out of therapeutic and healing spaces. And, I think that came up in the webinar I did, what is sex positivity? What does that even mean? And the fact that a lot of folks who are healthcare workers, that's not necessarily something they've had to think about in their professional world. And so one of the reasons why I was inspired to put on that webinar is because, I do this in my work. To me, it's very normal. It's something that's explicitly foundational in both of our practices. And in this 12-month program I'm in, I'm not surprised, but just like most other trainings, similarly to somatic experiencing, it's not an area of focus for the training. A culmination of different events that just make me wonder, if we're going into, whether we're sitting for a friend or we're a healthcare facilitator, we're sitting for someone else, or working in a therapeutic or a ceremonial space, whatever the tone is, that, we at least are comfortable talking about this with other professionals, these subjects, because everybody is walking around with some relationship with sexuality. And I think most of us have some sort of, if it's not an acute boundary crossing or trauma that's happened, we do live in a society that has had a lot of shame around this subject.
Yeah. I mean, the word shadow is coming to my mind right now. And I'm just thinking of like the importance of creating spaces where much of our normal cultural discourse ignores and puts into the shadows sexuality and also psychedelics. So we're kind of creating a space where we can bring more light, more consciousness, awareness, heart into these spaces that are tainted with shame and shadow. And I think it's kind of impossible to be truly in an integrity and support integration until we bring some consciousness to these shadowy parts that exist within ourselves in relationship dynamics, including our dynamics with our clients, let alone like kind of like navigating the larger cultural context of being sexual beings, exploring altered states, or like being impacted by is revealed in these being impacted by like the stuff that lives in these shadows in our larger like social context. Did that make sense, what I just said?
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. And I think and my translation is like meta shadow, it is this. And I think because, okay, the subject of psychedelics has been taboo in mainstream for a while. It's being integrated. And then same with sexuality, that, okay, if we talk about these things in the same place, that's a little too much. And my understanding is if we don't, have not only talk about it, but create some deeper understanding of how this shows up in our own personal somas and in professional areas, how we're actually looking at ourselves as professionals. Are we perpetuating that avoidance in these professional spaces? And is that serving our clients? Or is it going to be perpetuating potential harm, you know, even accidentally, of course. So I think that's why we're here. But yeah, I totally agree. And it's that shadow. And I think that, you know, if it's what we resist persists, that sort of thing. So I know for me, you know, part of my catalyst and why I'm here too is this oversimplification when we're talking about a boundary dissolving experience that psychedelics are, and a very boundaried space, which is a therapeutic space, especially considering the medical model. And of course, I know professionals are operating in all sorts of different areas. How does that ethically work together? Especially around, you know, boundaries, trauma around boundaries, which is most people's, whether it's an emotional or physical boundaries, that's what we're healing from. And so in the protocols, no sexual contact between practitioner and client, that's an obvious stated protocol. That's often as far as it goes, no sexual contact. And then if you want touch, it's going to be consent. And that's as far as it goes.
Yeah.
So
there's not a lot of nuance. There's not a lot of digging deep. I mean, one can totally be in this space of like no sexual contact, but like how you're holding the experience of your sexuality, the client's sexuality, energetically, somatically, can just totally leak into the atmosphere. And then so like without safe de-shamifying spaces to name and unpack and be with and unwind those understandable desires that arise in our system, then it's going to be harder to like hold that in an integrated way where there's room for both like natural expression, but also like the value of containment is balanced in a positive healing way.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. There's a lot of therapists and practitioners integrating psychedelics into their practices who don't necessarily have somatic sex positivity experience under their belt. And so contact becomes energetic, like you just said, in the psychedelic realm, even if the practitioner is not, you know, they're not taking anything, it's still relevant.
For sure.
Yeah.
Maybe
so I think that's why we're here.
This is why we're here. Yeah. And maybe this would be a good time to ask that question we were looking at earlier of, who would be a good fit to step into this pure supervision group? Yeah, is it appropriate for a practitioner, say an acupuncturist, or do you exclusively have to be a sex expert or a psychedelic practitioner?
Yeah. And I know in creating this, we talked about that, you know, this is a professional space. So this is a space for people who are seeing clients in a healthcare profession. What I've noticed, since April in the Psychedelics Today program, I've had clients bringing psychedelics up to me, and before I was ever sharing publicly that I was integrating this. I think it's coming up more and more in the general population. A lot of this research has been going on forever, but like especially in the last 10 years, it's really integrating into the mainstream. So, and like we were talking about earlier with sexuality, and even if somebody's asexual, it may or may not be relevant for someone in all sorts of healthcare practices, even if that's not necessarily what your practice is explicitly revolving around.
Right.
Yeah.
people are going to find that intersection being revealed in their practice regardless, even if they're not like signaling to the world that this is what their practice is about. So yeah, I would say anybody who's got active healing professional practice and is curious about how to show up in that space where sex and psychedelics interact, not necessarily by putting their own bodies in it or like inviting clients into that space in their healing practice, but at least they're like they as the professional and or their clients are exploring those questions.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, as that you know, the somatic trauma-informed, you know, framework has become more and more available for people, even on just like social media. Like it's becoming more normalized, I think.
For sure.
Since COVID too, it's like, okay, this stuff is stored in our bodies all sorts of ways. It's all connected. And so whether it's someone's client's child interacting with substances and they want to be able to support them best, so they can be kind of like an ally for that, or you know, I think it could be showing up in so many different ways. So just having a professional space for us to be able to really serve our clients better.
Yeah, and connect and feel not alone, and to normalize so many different things that, again, are kind of regulated to the shadows, and hold it with curiosity and compassion and trauma-informed practices. So if you listeners are interested in contemplating sex and psychedelics with us, please check out the comment sections, find the link to the Eventbrite page somewhere connected to this video post.
Thank you.